The screaming in the hall echoed and distorted as new voices joined in. Sometimes the subject screamed so loudly and for so long they ripped their vocal cords apart, or would start spewing blood from the torn capillaries in their throats. I smiled to myself. Personally, I had nothing against these men and women here, even though some of them were from Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, or Mexican drug cartels. We had murderers, torturers, rapists, terrorists, and gang members galore to experiment on. But who was I to judge their actions? After all, I wasn't a much better person. I was just on a different side. I tortured people for the CIA and to protect the USA above all. Jay, a chubby blonde secretary with the moon face, said from behind me. I turned to look at her. Cheryl, I said, nodding my head and smiling pleasantly. Cheryl was the ultimate in compartmentalization. At home, she was just a regular soccer mom with kids and PTA meetings. Here, she was an efficient bureaucrat for a secret black ops project that regularly tortured people, sometimes even to death. She kept each part of her life separate and never seemed bothered by switching from one to the other. Her help had likely prevented dozens of terrorist attacks and kidnappings across the globe. The screaming was almost deafening now, so I pulled her by the arm and we headed towards the nearest break room, where I poured myself a cup of coffee and lit a cigarette. So I have good news, she said cheerily, smiling a fake sweet smile at me. Your new method of enhancing interrogation has a 95% success rate. 95%? I exclaimed, elated. That's higher than waterboarding or sensory deprivation or anything else. Actually, that's exponentially higher. The new method of enhanced interrogation, a euphemism for torture, involved a drug called Salvia divinorum. We would extract the main psychoactive chemical from it, which is called salvinorin A, and run an IV drip into the subjects. Normally, Salvia divinorum was smoke and created incense, dysphoric hallucinations that rapidly faded after a few minutes. But by running an IV drip of the drug, we could keep the subjects drugged in a nightmare horror state for days or weeks. Their mind would start to snap after a week straight of the drug. However, at times, we would combine the effects of the drug with sensory deprivation or waterboarding on the most hardened subjects. Being a scientific man myself, I had tried a single IV syringe of the salvinorin A so that I would know what the subjects were going through. Just that one dose was immensely horrible. I saw myself getting cut up into 5 pieces, the room falling apart. The fake plastic plants decorating my office started talking to me and mocking me with sarcastic movements. It was an incredibly uncomfortable and disorienting experience for the 3 or 4 minutes that it lasted. I could see why even the most psychopathic killer would start to crack after days straight of living in that constant nightmarish world. Cheryl held out a folder to me, a top secret label, and a CIA insignia embedded into the front of it. I frowned and took it. What's this? I asked, opening it up. You're being moved, she said, putting her hands up. Look, I tried to argue against it, telling them your research here wasn't finished, but they insisted that they have something far more important for you stateside. They want you to leave Guantanamo Bay within 15 minutes. They have a helicopter waiting for you outside already. That's ridiculous, I said, my heart rate rising and a warm flush taking over my face. I'm not even close to finishing my research here. I need at least another week to finalize the results. She shook her head at me. Orders from the top brass. Sorry, Jay, she said, turning to leave me. Fuming, I went to my office and packed up the most important files in a briefcase, then walked out to the helipad. It was already running, blowing the salty Caribbean air around me and a deafening cacophony. The pilot took off as soon as I was inside the helicopter. Looking to my left, I saw Cheryl. She smiled wanly at me, then looked down at her phone, feeling the vibrations of the craft resonate through my body as we headed towards Florida. What could they have wanted me to see that was so important it needed me to immediately leave my current assignment? I wondered. I had seen some horrible things, men breaking their bones as they strained against the drowning horror of waterboarding. Men tearing their own eyeballs out after they had lost their sanity. Prisoners killing other prisoners by ripping throats out with their teeth. I hoped whatever they had waiting for me would not leave me with any deeper PTSD than I already suffered. I already had enough nightmares to last me 1,000 years. I had woken up screaming for the past week straight, and at times I was afraid to fall asleep for what I would see in the dream world. Soon, I could see the white sand of the Florida beaches approaching. The Black Ops site was surrounded by 3 layers of razor-wired topped electric fences. Guards and sniper towers formed on the outer perimeter every few hundred feet. No one had ever escaped from this site, which we simply called the lighthouse. Inside the razor wire stood a single behemoth of a building, pure white with no windows or insignia anywhere. It rose up and became narrower as it did so. Each floor formed a perfect circle, and at the top lay a helipad where the pilot now aimed the chopper. It did resemble a lighthouse in some ways, hence the nickname. That wasn't the only reason why we called it that, however. This was also the main hub of the psychic research for the entire eastern seaboard. The prisoners here were chosen for their supposed paranormal or mystical abilities, to be studied at leisure by scientists and agents of the CIA. As I got out of the chopper, an agent with black sunglasses and a black suit was waiting for me. Dr. Salem, he asked me, shaking my hand. "You can just call me Jay," I said, smiling my fake smile. With a gentle guided hand on my shoulder, he led me down to the top level. "We have been following your research with the Selvinoran agent with Rapture," he said, a deadpan expression on his face. As we entered the staircase, the fluorescent lights began to flicker. We actually modified the agent somewhat, synthetically strengthened it, and added some chemical function groups that make it cross into the brain more effectively. We were about to test it on the first patient here, a shaman we kidnapped from the Amazon after witnessing his abilities to levitate objects, to create light out of his hands, as well as other psychic phenomena. I followed him down a sterile gray hall to a gray metal door labeled 1308. He opened it and I followed him inside. A naked bronze-skinned man was strapped down to a metal gurney, an IV tube leading from his arm to a machine. From the top of the IV pole hung a solution labeled Selvinoran Ethoxy Alpha C. A doctor in a lab coat stood next to him, smiling as we walked in. The CIA agent nodded at him, and he turned on the machine, letting the solution begin to drip down the clear plastic tubing and into the vein of the restrained man before me. His eyes widened in surprise, and he lifted his head and looked straight at me. The fires of hell seemed to dance behind his dilated pupils. His face transformed into a vicious snarl, his frown lines deepening to cracks as he regarded me with abject hatred. "You will see how damned you are," he said with a thick Spanish accent, never taking his gaze off me. "And you will see hell unleashed before you. You are demons in human skin, but the real demons are here to reclaim their throne." He smiled wickedly. The grin appeared to move unnaturally wide until it reached from ear to ear. "The slit wrist of the sky will open up, and the horrors of hell will be with you." "Why is he still talking?" I asked the doctor. "Usually subjects become immediately incapacitated by the intensity and dysphoria of the experience. I've never seen one able to talk before, even on Selvinoran A. And you claim this chemical is much stronger than that." The doctor shook his head. "This is not a normal subject, Dr. Salem," he said to me. "This man broke the necks of 2 soldiers as we brought him in, without even touching them. In terms of psychic powers, he is one of the strongest specimens we have ever seen. We have given him large doses of other drugs, such as LSD and barbiturates, and he seems to metabolize them much faster and remain mostly unaffected when he is injected with heavy doses." I looked back at the shaman and immediately realized something was immensely wrong. Where there had been a white wall behind him, there now stood a fiery red hallway that seemed to extend for 1,000 feet. His gaze had left me and now stared into the back of the room. A massive metal door that looked hundreds of feet tall stood there. With a shriek of metal, it began to slide open slowly. That door hasn't opened for 100,000 years, the shaman said, his voice rising with a mixture of euphoria and rage. But I have opened it for you now. Smoke and fire poured from the door as dozens of blackened grasping hands grasped it, trying to push it forward faster. The mammoth weight of it held them in for a few seconds longer. But as more and more hands joined in, it started to fly open, then smash into the wall with a deafening roar like a gunshot going off. I turned to run then, but I found the door behind me locked. I ran to it, trying to open the knob or turn the deadbolt, but it felt like I was fighting against a solid metal wall. Looking back behind me, I saw the first of the beings had reached the end of the hellish entryway and reached the CIA agent and the doctor. The beings that ran into our room had blackened, sizzling skin, smoke still blowing behind them. They had no clothes but only burnt flesh. Their eyes glowed red, their hair all gone from the constant fires they lived in, and they began to rip the CIA agent and doctor apart with their bare hands. They tore off their skin, leaving blackened marks as they flayed them with sheer brute strength, licking the blood off their hands with sighs of pleasure. At that moment, the door of the room burst open and a team of CIA agents in SWAT gear entered, assault rifles raised. I let them all run past me and then tore off down the hall. Behind me, I heard screams that echoed after me. I ran back to the helipad and told the pilot what had happened, and we quickly left that den of horror. I don't know what happened back at the lighthouse, but I got out alive. The pilot and I were the only ones, as far as I know, who left that place alive. Hopefully the evil was contained within its walls, but if it gets out, it may lead to the end of our world. I work as a volunteer in a wolf sanctuary up in the Pacific Northwest. It's a fairly small establishment, and a fairly young one too. We started during the 2010s, and we kept going as a small but determined group of people. We take things seriously, and we live by our desire to help these majestic beasts. The sanctuary stands on a pretty remote spot, completely surrounded by forest. We like the thought of keeping our animals as close as possible to their habitat, and this position also lets us keep track fairly easily of the wolves we set free after the rescue. It isn't an easy life by any means, but we've managed to adjust to it, some more than others. For me, these forests really feel like home, and once we got our cabin up and running with electricity and internet, I stopped caring about my life in the nearby town. I had all I wanted right there, among the trees. However, for the sake of everyone's mental well-being, we take turns to stay in here. No more than 2 weeks, no less than 2 people. The woods can really strain your mind, and that's not optimal when your daily routine revolves around caring for wild animals that can easily weigh more than 100 pounds and could potentially tear you to shreds in mere seconds. This time, it was me and Oliver's turn. It was a pretty chill time. Oliver is amazing at his job. The weather was nice despite the low temperatures, and our residents were absolutely lovely. By residents, I mean our 4 wonderful specimens of northwestern gray wolves, rescued as pups and raised by us in captivity. 4 wonderful females, Artemis, Tia, Ice, and Dawn. They are a considerable amount of work, but it's really worth it. So I was saying, things are going pretty smooth. Then, yesterday morning, one of the GPS devices we use to track rescue wolves sent out a signal, nothing really out of the ordinary. This signal in particular lets us know that the device has not moved at all in the last 24 hours. It could mean that the animal is hurt, but most times it simply means that the device has somehow detached from the collar of the wolf and needs to be recovered. So Oliver decided to go and check it out. The day went on as usual until early afternoon. Oliver contacted me via radio, stating that he was rushing back to camp. I could hear his voice being a little different, less composed and calm than usual. About 20 minutes later, he rolled into the front of the sanctuary with our pickup. "Man, you gotta take a look at this," he said, getting off his vehicle in a hurry. As I approached the back of the pickup truck where Oliver was standing, I could immediately feel the pungent smell of rotting flesh. Oliver said nothing. He just stared down, eventually covering his nose. On the back of the pickup truck lay the corpse of a wolf we rescued months back. His beautiful black fur ruffled, his eyes and mouth wide open, and 3 huge slashes on the side of his body. Those are way too big, I remember thinking instinctively. We tried to assess the situation with Oliver back in the hut. We decided to drive back to town before sundown, so we could get the carcass to the local vet in hopes of getting some answers. He proposed to ask someone to come over and cover him for the night, but I assured him I would be just fine. He left shortly after, leaving me alone with the wolves, who were wandering around their pen, probably alerted by the strong smell of death still faintly present in the air. I finished my task for the day, prepared some canned food for dinner, and ate it straight out of the can. While trying to wrap my head around the wounds on that wolf, I had never seen anything like it, and a quick check in the sanctuary's archive revealed that something like that had just never happened before. It was common to find dead wolves, but it was way less common to find massacred ones. Just as I was skimming through all our reports, I realized that one of the wolves was loudly growling outside. A weird behavior for sure. I looked out the window. It was Artemis on the far side of the pen, right next to the fence, growling at the dark tree line just ahead. I found it extremely weird for her to be doing such a thing. I grabbed my flashlight and headed outside. I could see my breath, and I realized that the evening air had gotten slightly colder than usual. I made my way to the fence, opened the gate, and squeezed myself in. Tia, Ice, and Dawn came out of their enclosures and quickly made their way around me. Now this wasn't unusual per se, but the way they kept their posture low was. They were clearly alarmed by something. I called for Artemis, to no avail. She just kept on growling at seemingly nothing. In the air, the same rotting smell was still present, if not even stronger than before. This couldn't have been possible. The whole situation gave me a gut feeling like no other. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I was feeling exposed. Part of me wanted to get the wolves and crawl back into the hut with them. Clearly not the brightest train of thought. I slowly made my way to Artemis. When I placed my hand on her back, she stopped growling and started softly whimpering to me, briefly looking at me before staring back in the dark. She seemed relieved. I flashed my light in the dark. Nothing but trees. No movement, anything at all. The wolves didn't cut back on their alerted state though. They were still scared by something. I started talking them back to the enclosures and locked them in. As I was closing Tia's door, Dawn started growling too, immediately followed by Ice from inside her enclosure. My unease started to spiral out of control, so I hurried the whole process. Once the doors were locked, I started walking back to the hut, but then I realized how silent the whole place had become. Dead silence all around. Then, a faint shuffling, some twigs breaking. My heart sank. It came right from where Artemis was growling at. I stood there like a deer in the headlights, pondering my options. I decided to check once again, just to be sure, before going back to the hut as fast as possible, closing the door, closing all the shutters, and just trying to get some sleep. I walked slowly, flashlight in my right hand, pointing the beam left and right. Then, I saw them. 2 eyes in the darkness, shining back at me. 2 amber dots, about a foot from the ground. The eyes of a wolf? As I kept on staring at them, wondering what was going on, something impossible happened. Without breaking eye contact, the dots started lifting up and up and up. When they stopped, they stood among the pine needles, about 10 foot high, before vanishing. I kept hearing twigs break before silence fell back around me. That was it. I darted back to the hut, closing every damn shutter and bolting the doors. I stood there in the complete darkness and in complete silence, hardly getting any sleep at all. As I write this, the sun is way up in the sky, but I still can't shake off the dreadful feeling those eyes cast upon me. The wolves seem to be fine, and Oliver should be returning later today. The forest felt like my home. Today, I don't feel so sure about that anymore. Have you ever heard someone say your name just as you're falling asleep? Usually when that happens to me, it's my dad's voice, a familiar sound my brain has decided to reproduce as I transition to dreamland. 2 weeks ago though, as I lay in the darkness waiting to drift off, I heard my name as a whisper, Shauna. Since I thought it was just a sleepy hallucination, I let myself resume the drifting off process. Shauna. The second time I heard my name, I still wrote it off. Shauna. The third time, I sat up quickly as if I just felt the first tremor of an earthquake. I live alone. What was that? Shauna. A little louder this time. Shauna. Louder still, like a stage whisper. Shauna. 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 By now, I was frantic, shaking, trying to untwist from my sheets as I scrambled out of bed, so vigorously pulling the chain to turn on my bedside lamp that it almost fell off the table. The whispers penetrated straight to my eardrums, as commanding as screams. I don't know why my attention focused on the jewelry box sitting on the dresser, but nevertheless, I moved to open it. Shauna. The whispering stopped the moment I opened the box. Clammy and breathless, I marched that box outside in the freezing winter air and tossed it in the trash. I'd already lost the ring a month ago anyway. I didn't know what I was dealing with, but I sure as heck wasn't keeping that box. When nothing more happened for the next couple of days, I held 3 competing hypotheses in my mind. 1, that I had dreamt it. 2, that I was losing it. Or 3, that there was something in that ring box, but that it was well on its way to the landfill, never to be heard, by me at least, again. Unfortunately, I was forced to confront a 4th hypothesis 3 days later. I lay in my bed watching the shadows cast on the wall by the bare branches outside my window. Shauna. Primed to act following the original incident, I began immediately to search for the source of the whisper, hoping that whatever caused me to home in on the ring box would also guide me this time. Shauna. 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 The whisper stopped when I opened my wicker laundry basket. At this point, I wouldn't entirely blame you for thinking, so what? A whisper isn't intrinsically menacing, and all you have to do is open a box to make it go away. But I dare you to take a look around your room right now. Find a box, a canister, any container, and see if you can imagine hearing your own name. A soft whisper at first, then louder and increasingly insistent until you find the source. Of course, I considered the possibility that my second hypothesis was the correct one. I could simply be losing my mind. I thought this particularly likely when the whisper started happening in the daytime too. But when I answered a call from my mom during an episode, Shauna, 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 she heard it too.
Who's there with you?
She asked, and that's all I needed to know. If I thought finding out I was crazy was bad, turns out finding out I'm not alone in my apartment is worse. The thing, whatever it was, continued to taunt me, enacting a sick game of hide and seek that I had played over and over and over. I found it in the oven, under the cap of a herbicide can, even on one horrifying occasion, in the protector for the pillow under my head. I thought leaving my house would give me a break, but it hissed my name from my purse as I walked across the grocery store parking lot in the gathering dusk. The last time I left my house was 3 days ago. It was closing time at the local mom and pop bookstore, and I was the only patron. The owner, a mustachioed old Boston type, was ringing up a wall calendar while I fumbled for my credit card. Shauna. My head snapped up to see the owner now with his eyes rolled back. The whisper had come from his closed mouth. Shauna. Blood rushed in my ears, but not loud enough to drown it out. I reached forward as in a trance myself. I placed my finger on his chin, his jaw lowered, gaping wide like a nutcracker. I didn't stay to find out if he was okay. I ran to my car and blew through every stop sign on my way home. I decided then that I would live off the non-perishables in my pantry and have groceries delivered when those ran out. There was no way in hell I'd risk interacting with another human again unless I could be sure their face wouldn't cleave. I didn't want to think about what would happen if the thing decided to hide inside me. If my eyes rolled back, would I be able to open my own jaw? Maybe it already crawled in and out of my mouth from time to time. Right now, I'm parked a few yards away from a pond garnished with patches of ice. I'm here because earlier on this cold January night, I made a mistake. When I sat in my living room trying to distract myself with a crossword, I heard Shauna coming from the dingy metal lockbox on my bookshelf. The box has sentimental value. I kept babysitting money in it as a teenager, but I no longer have the key. The whispers got louder and more demanding as I tried and failed to open the box. I'm sure there are tools that would have gotten it open easily, but I panicked. Shauna! I grabbed the lockbox, ran to my car, and started to drive. I was frantic to make the whispering stop. My body tense as I braced for the next time I would hear my name. I drove to where I'm parked now, got out of the car, and heaved the box into the pond's dark water. I had two hypotheses, if you can even use that word to describe my wild, grasping thoughts. One, that the thing would simply rematerialize in some other container, maybe even my glove compartment on the drive home. Or two, that it would be gone forever. I didn't consider the third possibility, that it would still expect me to open that drowned lockbox, that it wouldn't be satisfied until I did, that no matter how far away I got, it would whisper to me from beneath the pond's surface. The sound as clear to my ears as if it was right beside me. Shauna. I'm a big fan of anything creepy, spooky, paranormal, you name it. I go hunting for monsters frequently, and I was pretty convinced I'd find something eventually. Surprisingly, the odd thing I was hoping to find was in my house's attic. I'd been tasked by my mother to clean out the old attic, as it hasn't been touched in years. It took an hour just to get rid of the dust and cobwebs, so I was pretty tired by the time I had sorted out the items. Most of it was useless junk, keepsakes, and things I thought I lost years ago, but were apparently jammed up here without being told. After about an hour of looking around, I found a box with my father's name on it. We call him Frank, considering I haven't seen my dad in years, and my mom never talked about him. I was very curious. I opened the box and found a few things inside. First, I found a stuffed animal of a lion. The lion's fur was covered in black crusty stains that felt like the texture of dirt. A note on it read, "From Frank, will you be my friend?" I set it off to the side to look for more interesting stuff. The second item was a stack of papers. It had random words written on it like cat, bee, and red. The writing seemed to get progressively better as I went on, but it was more like going from barely readable to a child's semi-understandable handwriting. The third item was some old expired candy. I didn't think much of it and ended up throwing it off to the side. The fourth was another expired bag of food, but this time it was an off-brand bag of potato chips. Again, this item also didn't seem very important. The fifth item was exactly what I was looking for. It was a journal. Since my mother always refused to answer any questions about my dad, this surely would. I opened the journal up, ready to find out what my dad's life was like. I am not the type to write a journal, but I figured since my current assignment is of the most dangerous and uncertain type, I will write it so at least somebody will know what happened to me in case the mission does kill me. I am to investigate a strange entity that was captured sneaking around one of our laboratories. It seemed to be trying to release one of our bioweapons. Melissa was quickly alerted of this, so she sent a team of soldiers to capture the entity. After a while, it was confirmed to be secure and was sent to me to be researched. I wasn't sure if I should be glad that I'm considered such a high-level researcher where I can investigate top-secret entities such as this one, or if I should be terrified. There's no turning back now. I didn't know how I was supposed to feel reading this. According to this tiny journal in my hand, somewhere out there is a lab with paranormal creatures and bioweapons. This felt like something out of the book, to be honest, which is the kind of stuff I like, but I was a bit disappointed. I didn't think this was gonna be real at all. I wanted a real story of my dad's life, not some sort of science fiction story he probably wrote for himself. Despite all of this, I knew that my school's paranormal investigation club, which was sadly not a real club, but something me and my friends had made up, would appreciate. I called them, and 3 of my friends said they would come. While I was waiting for them to get here, I continued to read the story. However, I found out that most of it wasn't very story-like. It was just a bunch of scientific nonsense that I might have been able to understand if I paid attention in biology and chemistry class. I began to regret calling them over, but I was able to pull out some information from the book. I wrote down the information on a sheet of paper. 1. The entity is not made out of anything on the periodic table. 2. The entity can change shape and color. None of my father's tests were able to prove why. 3. The entity has potential to be a sentient being. 4. Lots of what my dad does seem to be conducted with the help of Melissa. However, he seemed to be deeply afraid of Melissa. And 5. The entity has copied my dad's behavior before. He is going to start training the entity. I decided to save the training the entity part as something me and my friends to read together, since it seemed much more understandable than whatever I just read. It was just in time when I heard some people knocking at the door. I ran downstairs and opened the door for them. My mom scowled when she saw them and pulled me to the side. I told you to clean the attic, not to hang out with your friends. Finish cleaning, then you can go do your ridiculous monster hunting things, she whispered loudly. I just begged her to let us go in the attic. I told her that I just wanted to show them evidence of a ghost in the attic. Then, we would all clean up the attic together and get it done super quickly. My mom reluctantly agreed and let my friends inside. I led my friends into the attic and then to the old journal. My friends all looked eager to see what was inside. My friend Kathy, a girl with a gothic fashion sense and obsidian black hair, was obsessed with ghosts. Asked if I was lying about there being ghosts in my attic. I replied, sadly yes. My friend Lisa, a messy-haired girl with a dad who was obsessed with monster hunting, asked if my dad's journal revealed that my dad was a monster hunter too. Not really, I replied. Apparently he was a scientist who researched a strange monster. Lisa and Kathy both looked excited to open the book. However, my third friend Dave seemed to have been uneasy since he saw my mother. Dave was one of my newest friends, and this was the first club meeting he's been to. All of my friends are outcast, but Dave was a whole new level of weird. He acted normal, I guess, but nothing seemed natural about him. It was as if the muscles in his face were built wrong. He could smile wider than a normal person could. He could open his eyes wider than any person could. On top of that, everything about him was perfectly symmetrical. His face was perfect. His clothing was incredibly boring but nice, and his hair was neatly combed. We didn't mind briefing him though, since we accepted everyone with an interest in supernatural things to our group. Dave seemed nervous about this. So, I'm not sure if this journal is real or fake, but it's definitely the biggest piece our club has found in a very long time. In fact, after I explain the entity my dad was researching, we can read the next section together. How does that sound? I asked. Kathy and Lisa nodded their heads. Dave nodded his reluctantly. And so, I explained what I thought about my dad's job and what the entity was like. As we were talking, Dave began to look at some of the other stuff my dad had. He took the expired bag of potato chips, opened them, and started to eat them. "Hey, don't eat those. That's one of my dad's things." I snapped at him, much ruder than I anticipated. I quickly corrected myself. "Well, they're also expired. You'll get a stomach ache." Dave seemed to sort of understand and put the chips down. He began to play around with the lion instead, wanting to get on with the journal. I just ignored him. I then began to talk about Melissa, who I thought to be my dad's boss. "Hey," my mom called to us. "It doesn't seem like you two are talking about Ghost. Stop talking about this Melissa lady and start cleaning if you kids aren't going to talk about Ghost." "All right," I whispered. "We'll just talk quieter then. Are we ready to start reading the journal?" My friends nodded their heads, and I began to read out loud to them. What was in the journal was surprisingly wholesome. I began the entity's training by teaching it simple movements. I taught it how to wave hello with one of its black inky hands. I then taught it how to move around in a circle and to shake its head, and even dance to music. However, anytime I came to do my research, it always shook its head for no. So I began to look for food it likes. At first, I tried feeding it candy. It seems to really hate sweet foods. I found that it really enjoys potatoes, especially potato chips. It was much more happy to be taught these things when it was rewarded with potato chips. The journal entries of these events were much more fun to read than the previous ones. It was as if my dad was training a dog. Eventually, I had taught the being how to talk, read, and write. The being's human transformation is a bit unsettling, but it is still impressive for Melissa. I even gave it a stuffed lion for comfort, and it seemed to really enjoy it. Now, I can eventually figure out what the creature's motives were. I almost immediately flipped to the next page, eager to see what would happen next. Everything felt like it was going downhill as I read it. I found out that the entity was not of this world, but some sort of very far away point in space. I predict it used some sort of wormhole to get closer to Earth. The entity claims that its ancestors had been here before, a long time ago, and would shapeshift into humans. The entity said it was told that they are here to finally make this land their home. It said that there were too many people living here, so we must find a way to get rid of them. Luckily, the people there had things that would make it easy. Melissa was finally able to confirm that the entity was hostile. She wanted to get rid of it. We finished our mission. However, I knew that the entity wasn't evil. It was so sweet. It had its own interest and preferences. It had a favorite stuffed animal. It was like a human child. I wanted to keep it. I wouldn't let Melissa get rid of it. I knew what I had to do. If my workplace was against the creature, then I'm against the workplace. Me and the entity had finally got rid of the workplace. I don't even care about the horrors that escaped it. At least we're both safe. Melissa survived. She hates me. She had went completely insane. I don't have much time left. I shouldn't have married this woman. The rest of the pages were blank. I closed the book. Well, I guess this is the end. It's probably just a story though. I felt dizzy. My heart was racing. I knew that this story had to be fake, but a part of me said it had to be real. I slowly walked out of the attic, listening to a conversation from downstairs. "Melissa?" Dave asked. What was Dave doing down there? "No, my name is Stephanie. Didn't my son tell you about me beforehand?" "Melissa, it's me." I heard a scream. I fell down the attic stairs and ended up passing out. When I woke up, my house was empty. I had a note next to me. The note was poorly written and had multiple punctuation and grammar errors. "Hello, Jamie. You know your dad, Frank. I guess you're a friend now like him. Well, I got rid of Melissa, who is not my friend. The other girls tried to stop. I guess they weren't my friends too. But you didn't respond to me, so I just did it myself and left. Goodbye." Did what? I looked downstairs. 3 dead bodies, who I couldn't even tell apart, were laying on the ground. All of them were covered in a black inky substance. I just went to the bathroom and threw up. I'm not sure if I should be glad I survived or not. My new friend is a monster. My family is dead. I don't even know if I should call the police or not, since I don't know if I'll get involved with even more creepy science stuff. I am terrified of monsters now. I want nothing to do with them. Also, Dave stole my dad's stuff.